there is a big factor going on, which you shouldn't ignore, is the debate around the no-fly zone. I get that we don't want to be at war with Russia. No one wants World War III. But there is a civilian catastrophe on the verge of happening in Ukraine, or at least might happen. And the only thing that people can really think of that would stop that is a no-fly zone. Or is there something else that any of you three can think of that might be as effective?
Well, let me tell you what the Ukrainians are asking for. They're asking for a no-fly zone. They're saying, clear the skies, we'll do the rest. And what they're saying is, it's not a question of there will be war or we're declaring war. There is a war. Mm-hmm. We're in a state of international war. And if you think it's just between Russia and Ukraine, you are mistaken. That's not the way the Russians think when they are making this attack. For example, when Putin told his great lie that his invasion was denazification, he didn't mean that Ukrainians are Nazis, although he does think that. But he was referring to, for example, what he called the Revolution of Dignity. He called it a CIA Nazi coup. So that this uprising, this democratic uprising, was sponsored by the United States, the major Nazi power, and the CIA. And of course, Ukrainians were either dupes or also Nazis. And of course, you say this is the craziest ideology of all, but it actually motivates him and what he pushes on his people. And what Russians have been told, with increasing virulence since the start of the Putin dictatorship, is that they are at war with the West. Mm-hmm. And when they say Ukraine, it is the West, because that's what it actually is. Mm-hmm. If Ukraine is democratic, and it is the West. If it is leaning towards the EU and NATO, which it is the West. Mm-hmm. It has these ambitions. So the reality of the war, as it's understood by the major combatants, is that it is a war between Russia and the West, and that it's an existential one. It's about survival. So the question about, is this declaring war or is this World War III, is actually a discussion that is not happening in the central part of the war. It's not a part of that framework. So when Ukrainians say, clear the skies, we'll do the rest, they're saying, we are in this war, and we either fight it to win it, or we fail in our responsibilities to ourselves and our way of life. It is at that level. I think that needs to be the framing. So regardless of what justifications you want to put about it, our NATO obligations, which are, by the way, irrelevant, or our fear of nuclear Armageddon, or if we're going to call it World War III or declare it like that, what you're doing is making a choice to use the United States' most effective power, which is its military power, to save lives now, or not use it and cause those lives to be lost needlessly. That is the moral choice.
But there's also just a reality that most Americans are not ready to send their kids to fight a war in Ukraine. And I know you're going to say it's a no-fly zone.
Ukraine has never asked for that. We'll do the fighting. And they have been doing the fighting. And they'll keep doing it.
If there are planes in the sky that are American planes,
clear the skies.
It would involve fighter jets shooting down other fighter jets. I mean, there is war there. There's not like, there's no way to get. So it's the no-fly zone would still
and there will be casualties and there will be losses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Necessary losses, you're saying, because it's going to save all the people in Ukraine and it's going to let the West win, which is really what's
but it's not going to happen in a vacuum, right? Yeah. So if
it's going to cause fewer people to die. If you have an offended
no-fly zone and a skirmish happens, which is highly likely with a no-fly zone and an aggressive aggressor, right? It just, you can't make a moral calculation and leave out the other half of the equation, right? So let's say, and I'm definitely curious to Michael's response on this, that you do the no-fly zone, and I am very sympathetic, obviously, to the need for it. But let's say we do it, and there's a skirmish. I mean, the whole paradigm that all of us have experienced in our lifetimes is to avoid a moment where Russia and the United States might engage in some capacity in a hot war, in a hot combat, because it was believed that from that you'll have escalation into a real conflict And then if it escalates enough, we've got a nuclear world. I mean, the whole world is armed and aligned in these two loosely defined alliances between East and West, right? So, it's just not, of course, I mean, if you focus exclusively on what's happening in Ukraine and the need of those people, the no-fly zone is a no-brainer, okay? But if you broaden that context, and I think our military planners are forced to do so, and think about potential effects of a no-fly zone, it does broaden the possibility that we end up with a conflict that does entail Russia and the United States militarily.
We might land up there. We might land up there anyhow. Is what?
And we might.
You talked about a paradigm. What is that paradigm? It's a paradigm of the United States and Russia as peer powers. And that is a false paradigm. It's a pre-1991 paradigm. The actual war should follow a post-2014 paradigm, which is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's what's happening. That's what started in 2014. That is what is being extended now with this offensive that we're seeing. It is the Russo-Ukrainian war, an invasion. We've seen how it's worked. We've seen how it is working. And we can rationally predict how it will continue based upon what's happened from 2014 to today. And that is the paradigm. And the we're Cold War kids, as you said, accurately, that's about the audience of this program. But it's not about the major participants in this war. The United States is a bystander, unless it chooses not to be. Okay? And the only way it can effectively choose not to be a bystander is to do the right thing and to meet its obligations to Ukraine.
There's also NATO's obligations to NATO. I mean, those countries all are on the border there. And as this war worsens, as we've seen with the refugee crisis that's already building, but, this possibility that it's going to spread beyond Ukraine is also quite serious.
But neither Russia nor Ukraine are in NATO. Right. So that is not, the main issue.
It has impact over NATO. It has impact.
But so what? Let's talk about what does affect it. The Budapest Memorandum, under which Ukraine gave up all of its nuclear weapons in exchange for security assurances from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom. There's something that directly bears on this conflict, and it obliges the United States to assure Ukraine's security within its internationally recognized borders. So there's something that actually pertains to this conflict. The discussion about NATO and the threat of nukes is actually being fostered by Kremlin information warfare to weaken the United States' greatest strength, which is its military power.
Do you think the United States should do the no-fly zone on its own?
Of course. What has NATO got to do with it?
Well,
any country can choose to deploy their armed forces how they choose for their own national security. It's a basic principle of sovereignty.
And based on the Budapest Memorandum. So that it's true that memorandum said that, we get your nukes and we get to give you security guarantees.
The signing parties can carry out their obligations.
Right.
They could choose to do anything they like. Everyone says, we don't have to use military force. Of course you don't. It's not a treaty.
Right.
But any country can choose to take action to meet their commitments.